Normally you spend a lot of money with drilling and blasting rock. And this rock is it's soft enough that you can dig it freely with excavators, but it's hard enough that the walls hold up and you can open.
In the old Klondike tales, gold is a jealous treasure. It reveals itself only to those who prove their worth through hardship and endurance. For Parker Schnabel, that test came in the harshest form imaginable: total abandonment. His crew, the backbone of his entire operation, saw nothing but a failing season and a boss who pushed too hard. In mining, timing is everything. Move too soon and you spread yourself too thin. Wait too long and everyone knows you're desperate. His crew chose to walk away, packing their bags and leaving Parker standing on a patch of ground everyone had already written off. They thought they were leaving behind a failed dream, but in truth, they were walking away from a $30 million fortune, just moments before Parker would prove them all wrong. He was now a boss without a crew, chasing a 5,000-ounce goal, with both of his plants needing to deliver solid gold every week to make the season work. The Yukon air was thin and biting, so cold it felt like inhaling shards of glass. For weeks, that bitter chill had been the only constant for Parker's men. They moved like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness, their bodies heavy with exhaustion that reached clear to the bone. The life of a gold miner isn't just hard work. It's a relentless battle against the land, the machines, and the ticking clock. And this season, the grind seemed to be winning. Parker was pushing harder than ever. Every cleanup was followed by a demand for more. Every ounce weighed was judged as not enough. His goal wasn't just profit anymore. It was a colossal number that seemed to exist only in his mind, a dream that felt more like fantasy with every passing day. He'd raise a glass and say, "This one's for the people who helped you start, who helped along the way, but aren't here to share the moment." What few people realize is that a mining crew is a fragile ecosystem, held together by trust and shared suffering. When that fragile balance tips, everything begins to crumble. The warning signs had been there all along. Quiet mutters beneath the roar of the wash plant, tools slammed down with too much force, and the heavy silence that filled the mess hall at night. The men's faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow from 18-hour shifts, and the creeping sense that they were giving everything for a lost cause. They weren't just exhausted, they were becoming desperate. Tension hung over the claim like an oily fog. What no one noticed was that Parker wasn't just pushing his crew, he was pushing himself past reason. Driven by a gut feeling that he was close to something monumental, he demanded the impossible, not out of greed, but out of conviction. Yet his crew couldn't see that. All they could feel was the crushing weight of his ambition. The breaking point didn't come from one disaster, but from a series of them. A hydraulic hose burst, spraying superheated fluid into the frigid air. A critical pump seized up, choking the wash plant with mud. Every breakdown felt like a personal attack from the land itself. Men shouted over the roar of failing machinery, their frustration boiling into open anger. When Parker barked yet another order to get a dead rock truck moving, something inside the crew finally snapped. "We're done!" A voice cut through the chaos. "We're working ourselves into the ground for nothing." Helmets hit the frozen dirt with sharp, final cracks. One by one, the men turned their backs, not just on the broken machines, but on Parker himself. They stormed toward their trucks in silence, their movements heavy with weeks of pent-up resentment. Parker stood alone, watching as a string of taillights disappeared down the desolate access road. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the end of the world. He was now the king of a ghost claim, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of silent, useless machinery. What had once been his dream had turned into a lonely nightmare. But buried beneath that frozen ground was a secret he hadn't yet uncovered. His last chance. The morning after the walkout dawned bleak and unnervingly quiet. The familiar roar of diesel engines was gone, replaced by the low, mournful whistle of the Yukon wind. Parker was left with only a skeleton crew, a handful of loyal men who either believed in him too much to quit or simply had nowhere else to go. They huddled around a small fire, the mood heavy with exhaustion and doubt. The situation, to put it mildly, was catastrophic. A mining operation of this scale needs an army to function, not a few worn-out men. And the costs were staggering. Running a claim like Parker's could drain over $30,000 a day just in fuel, parts, and wages. Every hour of silence, every idle machine was burning through his money faster than the cold wind cut through their coats. Rumors started spreading among the remaining crew. Some whispered that Parker's obsession had finally driven him over the edge. But appearances can be deceiving. Parker wasn't just staring blankly at his maps. He was studying them with the intensity of a man searching for salvation. His eyes kept drifting back to one section of the property, a place called the Hollow Cut. The Hollow Cut was infamous, a cursed stretch of ground, scarred and abandoned by miners over a century ago. The old-timers had a saying, "There's no gold in the Hollow Cut." It had been tested, dug, and dismissed by generations of miners. To most, it was a graveyard of broken dreams and rusting iron. Conventional wisdom said to leave it alone. But Parker saw something no one else did. Subtle shifts in the geological survey lines. Faint traces of black sand that others had written off. Old test reports showing strange inconsistencies. And one peculiar dip in the terrain that hinted the bedrock wasn't where it should have been. He called his small crew together, spreading a worn map across a table. His finger traced the outline of the forsaken cut. "We're moving the plant here," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the crushing weight he carried. The men exchanged uneasy glances. To them, it sounded insane. Moving a wash plant was a massive, exhausting task, days of back-breaking labor. And to move it to a piece of ground known to be barren? That felt like pure desperation, the final act of a man on the brink of defeat. They argued, pleaded, even tried to reason with him. But Parker's resolve was unshakable, like granite. He was staking everything he had left, his reputation, his season, and his last few dollars, on ground everyone else believed was worthless. It was a gamble so bold, it bordered on madness. As the small crew began tearing down the wash plant, piece by heavy piece, an air of doom settled over them. They were following their leader, but they were following him into the unknown. Soon, they would discover whether Parker Schnabel was a visionary, or just another fool broken by the Yukon. When the digging began, the Hollow Cut proved even more unforgiving than they feared. The ground was a stubborn, frozen mix of clay and rock that fought the excavator's bucket with every pass. Progress was painfully slow. Once the wash plant was finally reassembled and towering over the desolate pit, it sputtered to life, chewing through low-quality pay dirt that produced nothing. The sluice boxes ran clear, catching no glimmer of gold. The crew's faces grew longer with each passing hour. Their patience and loyalty were stretched thin, worn down by exhaustion and disappointment. They were running on fumes, their faith in Parker shrinking to a faint, flickering ember. Some were on the verge of quitting, ready to join the others who had already walked away. And then, just when hope seemed to vanish completely, something changed. The pay dirt coming from the deepest part of the cut looked different, darker, heavier, streaked with a rich black sand so dense it looked like ink. Parker's heart quickened. This was what he'd been searching for. Black sand, the miner's signal that gold was near, because it settles in the same hidden pockets as the precious metal itself. The ground had finally started to speak. The first cleanup after hitting the new layer was tense. As the water washed over the miner's moss in the sluice box, a collective gasp rippled through the crew. This wasn't dust. It wasn't flakes. It was nuggets, thick, heavy chunks of gold scattered through the mats like seeds of sunlight. A cautious optimism began to spread through the camp. The next cleanup was even better, and the one after that was almost unbelievable. The sluice was catching so much gold, they had to stop and clean it out every few hours, a problem no miner in their right mind would ever complain about. Still, the true magnitude of what they had found didn't sink in until the assay results came back and the full weigh-in was complete. That night, under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, the crew gathered around a tarp piled high with gleaming gold. The mound looked unreal, almost like a movie prop. When Parker read the final certified total aloud, a stunned silence fell over the men. It wasn't a few 100,000. It wasn't even $1 million. The number was staggering, almost otherworldly. $30 million. It was the kind of discovery that hadn't been seen in the Klondike since the original gold rush over a century ago. For a moment, no one moved. Then the camp erupted, a primal roar of disbelief, triumph, and raw relief. They had stared into the abyss of total failure and come back with the treasure of a lifetime. But a fortune like that doesn't just draw attention. It stirs up ghosts. Word of the $30 million strike tore through the Yukon like wildfire. In small, tight-knit communities, secrets that big never stay buried for long. Truckers, bush pilots, and rival miners carried the story from one remote outpost to the next. The legend of Parker's hollow cut grew with every retelling, a modern fable of grit, instinct, and impossible luck. Inevitably, the news reached the ears of the men who had walked out. Some were drowning their regrets in Dawson City bars. Others were hundreds of miles away, trying to forget the bitter way things had ended. But there was no escaping it. They had stood on the edge of unimaginable wealth and turned their backs on it. The first of the deserters returned a few days later, his truck creeping up the access road like a slow funeral procession. He climbed out, head bowed, shame etched deep into his face. His apology came out in stammered fragments, a plea for forgiveness, for one more chance. Soon, more followed. They came in ones and twos, a steady procession of regret. Some said they'd only needed time to cool off. Others admitted it outright. They'd made the worst mistake of their lives. But a few came back with a very different attitude. Those men arrived as if nothing had happened, insisting they deserved a share of the riches. They argued that they had done the hard work and earned their peace, as though their walkout had been nothing more than an extended coffee break. Parker found himself facing an impossible choice. A test that would define not just his season, but the kind of man he wanted to be. The businessman in him saw only manpower and lost production, resources he desperately needed. But the man beneath the hard hat, the one still carrying the sting of betrayal, saw something far deeper. He listened to each man, his face unreadable, his emotions buried beneath a mask of calm control. Yet behind that quiet stare was a flood of memory, the sight of their backs as they'd walked away, leaving him alone against the wilderness. Now they stood before him, hats in hand, spinning tales of regret and desperation. Parker weighed every word carefully, searching not just for truth, but for traces of convenience, because in the Yukon, survival can make a liar out of any man. And that's when he learned one of the hardest lessons of leadership. The ledger of command isn't balanced in gold or grit alone. Sometimes forgiveness is the greater show of strength, not vengeance. It's an investment in a broken asset, instead of a total write-off.